Francisco, I thought in kind I would return a video message to you, although I am far more comfortable writing than I am talking. I think this warrants leaning into some of that discomfort. Thank you so much for engaging in the conversation and for helping me to establish a little bit more momentum in terms of thinking about, am I the only one? This is the same message to Alice, and we're not the only ones. And there is growing progress movement. I am encouraged by the work we are doing this summer. And Francisco, thank you also for your candid moments with the class of 2023 advisory team. I drew some strength from your comments as well as some insight, and also the conversations we had in the studio. I would love for those to continue. My hope is that they continue with more and different people, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 1-on-1. The smaller group, the better, just to exchange ideas and thoughts in the moment. I think that is really important for relationship building. You acknowledge the intersectionality of identity in your message, and I really want to highlight that my experience with diversity comes less from interacting with Black people than it comes from interacting with people with disabilities and Latinx community. As you may or may not know, I was a Spanish teacher for many years, and I studied and worked in Bolivia when I was in college and encountered such explicit racism within the family group that I lived with that I really had to come to terms with acknowledging how different my ideologies were and my frame of reference was. And at the time, I didn't realize it was privilege, but indeed it was privilege in being able to come into a country, live with a very white family of Criollo descent, so descended from the Spaniards, but native to Bolivia. And their entrenched dialogue, what they called discutir at the table, which was discussed but oftentimes translated as argued. And that's how I perceived it, as argument. As I got used to the heightened conversation and the heightened voices and the tone and the tenor that occurred at the dining room table, and walked away knowing that this family loved each other deeply, felt deeply, and interacted with their world in very genuine and true ways, I got a better perspective relative to how we feel and interact in society. Oftentimes, I refer to myself as a chameleon, that I tend to adapt into the, well, for lack of a better word, dominant culture with which I am enmeshed. As I went through my younger years, every summer I was at a camp, 6 to 9 weeks long every summer, and interacted with an extremely diverse group of people. A lot of Black students, a lot of Black counselors, and coming from inner city spaces in New Jersey, Camden, Paterson, Newark, East Orange. And I did get to know them as friends, and at an age of innocence where I was able to ask probably some of the dumb questions, I was also able to sit down beside them and engage in the conversations about cornrows and understanding how to do it. And there was no blame or shame or guilt in that experience, in that exposure. And as a result, as I got older, I really didn't understand in the same way the Black experience. My Black experience was in an ideal camp setting. However, I did witness my parents working very hard to make sure that anybody who wanted to go to camp could go to camp. They worked on the campership committees on scholarship. My mother was deeply involved in the YMCA. And then it wasn't until actually this past year I did a workshop called From Ally to Action. And as I'm growing in my own sense of whiteness and understanding, I'm also witnessing, feeling defensive of, guilty for, and excusing too. My parents' really intentional effort to raise me in a colorblind kind of way. And that wasn't right. but it was what they did. And so I'm enmeshed in that right now. You talked about what your work is over the summer. I've got my own personal work to do. So that enmeshing is where I am. I am simultaneously reading White Fragility and Ibram Kendi and Jason Reynolds' Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, which is a book that was written basically for young adults. But I'm really appreciating the style, the tongue-in-cheek sarcasm, and the true history that is an alternate history to what most of us have learned and do learn in school. And so coupling the Robin DiAngelo work with the Stamped from the Beginning, I'm hopefully hearing two different voices, a white voice and some black voices, as I engage with my own thinking. The WARE group this summer has coupled with Parker and Latin schools, and we had over 150 participants in a discussion yesterday, discussions that are happening every 2 weeks via Zoom, of course, and they are fueled by and facilitated through listening to the podcast called Seeing White, which is done in 2017, I believe, by John Biewen, and has brought voices, historians, sociologists together to have frank conversations about the United States history and the sociological realities of whiteness, blackness, white supremacy. And so that's the work that I am doing this summer, with the hopes of continuing to host conversations with any and all students at Lab who want to engage in these conversations, and also any and all faculty, community members. My goal is to create opportunities for people to have good conversations, establish rapport, establish relationships, and hopefully through modeling, as you talked about, change the tone of Lab. It's a big job. And I am just a small part of it, as you are another small part of it. Allison is another, and every individual member who is working through their own journeys of whiteness at this point. So again, thank you so much, Francisco, for your video. Seems that I can just as easily pull 6+ minutes out of conversation, and probably took me a lot less time than trying to write it all into words. So thank you for sharing another modality for communication. I hope we can continue the dialogue, and I'll look forward to future conversations. Thanks. Bye.